Heart of the Wolf by author A. Mariposa. A muy caliente paranormal romance featuring me, Gareth Delarosa, an alpha wolf without a pack. How do I convince this girl she's my life mate? Keep listening to find out. Shit, I'm no good at this. Chapter 6. Disclaimer. This chapter is rated not safe for work. It contains the best content, explicit sexual content, and a lot of teen angst, which is kind of our thing if you haven't noticed. Your listening discretion is advised, and for fuck's sake, put in earbuds.
True to his word, Gareth picked up a box of tacos from Arguello's on the ride home. They ate at the kitchen table when they got back to his house. Maddie watched Gareth wolf down his tacos with extra hot sauce. She ate too and wrapped up the rest for later. Then she sat at the kitchen table while Gareth inspected her bandage again. He used a cotton ball dipped in hydrogen peroxide to clean the wound, then wrapped her head with sterile bandages. Maddie wasn't used to being fussed over, and she squirmed uncomfortably. "Ouch, that hurts."
Hold still, and it won't.
She waited obediently, despite her urge to fidget. She sucked in a nervous breath.
Relax. Don't you trust me?
"I don't even know you."
Huh? But I've been looking out for you for a long time.
His voice was low and rocky. She shivered. The way he said it. About that, she hesitated. "Why were you out on those mountains last night?"
I like the fresh air.
He's lying, she thought. What kind of psychopath strolled through the mountains at 2 a.m. for a little fresh air? Then she caught herself. Actually, she did that too. Something about the forest and the moon called to her. A certain wanderlust. "So that's it?" she asked. "Really?"
Yep, got lucky. It was a full moon.
"Why does that matter?"
I'm always out on a full moon.
Maddie had never thought about it before, but now she wondered how often their random covert meetups coincided with the moon cycle. Gareth wrapped a strip of gauze around the side of her head, a duplicate of her old bandage, though not quite as padded. When he finished, he tossed the remnants of her old bandage in the kitchen trash.
Get up. Shower time.
"I took a shower this morning."
Take another one. You'll feel better. Just don't get your head wet.
Maddie opened her mouth to protest, but she was too exhausted to argue with him. Going to the trailer seemed to have put him on edge. He was still in protector mode. He walked with her down the hallway. After she entered the bathroom, he stood outside the closed door. Under normal circumstances, it would have been creepy, but tonight, it made her feel safe. She didn't want to be alone. Even closing the bathroom door between them stressed her out. "I feel so clingy." Maddie undressed, folding his clothes and placing them carefully to one side. Then she stepped under the hot stream of water. It helped. She began to feel a bit more human. Afterwards, she pulled on her pajamas from home, flannel pants and a black t-shirt. She brushed her teeth. Normal, she thought. Just doing normal things. After she finished, she went back into the hallway, where he was leaned up against the wall with his arms crossed.
You can throw your stuff in the laundry.
All right. They exchanged places. He entered the bathroom and shut the door behind him. She felt that bit of anxiety again when he disappeared from sight. God, I'm like a needy child. She heard the shower turn on. Maddie didn't know why, but a sudden wave of numbness washed over her. Her arms and legs started shaking uncontrollably. Now that she had a quiet moment alone, she felt the full effects of the last 24 hours. The gunshots. The brutal attack in the woods. Waking up in a strange place. School. Him. Going to the trailer might not have been the best idea. Whatever cocoon she was hiding in began to unravel. Her knees became wobbly, and her strength slowly drained from her body. She sank to the floor. She found herself wrapping her towel around her shoulders like a blanket. Her life rose up like a big, black ocean inside of her. She was this little boat spinning around. Her breath came in low, soft pants. She pressed her forehead to her knees. A panic attack. This is a panic attack. She couldn't summon a single thought, and yet, it seemed like some distant part of her brain was processing. She sat on the shag carpet, her arms folded tight around herself, and stared at the wall, her eyes glassy and vacant. He found her like that in the hallway. His shower finished, he stood over her, looking down at her. Then he lifted her to her feet.
You're out of it.
He led her into the living room, holding her hand, and sat her down on the couch. She felt fragile and empty. If left to her own devices, she probably would have stayed in that hallway for the next 10 hours. He put on a movie, an old western with John Wayne. The TV flashed pictures of the Wild Wild West, and John Wayne looked 10 feet tall on horseback. She stared at the screen blindly. He sat down and pulled her against his wide chest, his arms around her, one leg up on the couch, their bodies partway overlapping. He was careful with her head as he settled her against him. She relaxed in the warm circle of his big arms. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, beneath the cushion of his pectoral muscles. She stared at the TV screen, her mind blank, her gaze far away. Maddie floated like that for a while. She wasn't sure when she came back to herself. It seemed like hours had passed. She was lying across him on the couch, his big tattooed arms around her waist. The movie was finished, and he held the TV remote in one hand, flipping channels. He absently brushed his lips against the top of her head when she stirred.
You back?
Maddie kept expecting something crazy to happen, like a car to drive through the wall, or a bullet to shatter a window. But he was calm. They sat undisturbed, surfing channels, finishing out a wild day in front of his 60-inch TV. Gareth settled for the National Geographic Channel, some documentary about Aztec tombs. He watched the screen. The tension in her stomach started to fade. She inhaled. Exhaled. She focused on his scent. Old Spice? Axe? It was very manly. Finally, she mumbled, "What are you doing?"
What boyfriends do.
She heard his voice rumble up through his chest beneath her ear. That word, boyfriend, brought a warm feeling to her stomach. She mumbled again, "No." Like what are we doing?
Watching TV. Why? You want to watch something else?
No, this is fine. She gave up. She wanted to know more about him, why he seemed so chill, so unconcerned about their strange relationship. Her mind traveled back to the hardware store. After she started working there, he would come in every couple of weeks. In the beginning, she wasn't always at the register. The manager had her stocking shelves and doing itinerary, clean up on aisle 3, basic stuff. Usually, she caught sight of him when he was already leaving. But she remembered, once, she was covering the paint counter, and 2 men approached her. She was 16. They hovered around the desk, asking questions about outdoor paints that she couldn't answer. Then one guy leaned over and said,
"Hey, my friend thinks he knows you."
She remembered the uncomfortable drop in her stomach. "No, I don't think so," she said, wishing she had a hoodie on, so she could pull up her hood and slouch away.
"Nah, he says he knows you from somewhere. You ever go to Davenport? You go to the clubs there?"
"No," she said. It was a stupid question. She was obviously young and they were way older. The guy leered at her over the counter. His friend stood nearby, his hands shoved in his pockets, staring at her with gross intensity.
"Hey, so, when do you get off work?"
Maddie cringed. She didn't want to answer that question, but everyone knew the hardware store closed at 9 p.m.
"Tell me when you're off. We can grab some beers. Come on, you drive here? Or you having a friend pick you up?"
She looked around, wishing for someone to swoop in and interrupt their conversation. Then, suddenly, her eyes landed on him. He walked into the paint section silently. His presence sent a little shock through her system. She hadn't run up the mountain for a while. She was older now, and she knew better how to avoid her stepdad when he was drinking. These days when he was belligerent, she walked into town and sat at a diner until it closed, messing on her phone. Although she still thought of Gareth often, they hadn't encountered each other on the mountainside in a while. He came up to stand behind the two men. She met his gaze. He must have seen her desperate look. He spoke to her over their heads.
Hey, you got deck sealant?
She nodded, her palms sweaty.
Where? Show me.
The sleazy customer at the counter turned around, his face scowling, then stopped when he saw Gareth's towering frame. Gareth glared down at the two men.
You gonna buy something? Or you just pissing around?
The two guys stepped back quick.
Hey, we're good, no worries. You have a nice day.
The sleazy guy and his friend slunk off through the store. Gareth watched them go. Maddie walked out from behind the counter. She led him over to the deck sealant, barely able to look at him. She could feel him standing next to her. Here's what we got, she said, motioning to the shelf. Then, awkwardly, she muttered, thanks. Those guys.
Yeah. You should tell your manager.
She glanced up at him, feeling her face flush. She nodded silently. After a pause, he added.
Men are shit. Don't be nice. Tell them to fuck off. You got mace?
No.
You sell it here?
The hardware store had a self-defense cabinet in the back, next to the camping section. She nodded and pointed. It's, at the end of aisle 15. He grabbed a can of sealant and walked away. She stared after him, confused. Maybe 20 minutes later, he returned to the paint section and handed her a little keychain mace. It was still in the plastic wrapper. The price tag read $30. He bought her a nice one.
Keep it on you. Ask someone to drive you home tonight.
She took it. She watched him go. She remembered feeling a warm sense of relief. A sad, pouty part of her wished that he could drive her home. She should ask him. She hesitated as he walked away. Don't be weird, she told herself. She was the obsessive stalker in this situation. He was just some guy she met in the mountains. She didn't really know him.
Where'd you go?
Gareth's voice grumbled deep in his chest, bringing her back to the couch, his arms, the TV. His hand lifted up her hair, then gently cradled her head against him.
You tired? You can fall asleep if you want.
The thought of falling asleep on him sounded divine. She listened to his breathing, lulled by the gentle rhythm of his chest rising and falling. His spicy scent filled her nose. Is this real? Am I dreaming? She might have slept for a minute before the sound of the heater kicking on startled her awake. He resettled his arms around her. His thumb gently stroked over her cheek.
Relax.
He kept saying that word, relax. Was she really that tense? She had carried tension her whole life. His hand started kneading the top of her shoulder. It felt nice. Her breathing deepened automatically as he worked on a knot near her neck. Usually she didn't like being touched, but she could lean into this. Just breathe, she thought. He shifted, pulling his other leg up on the couch so she was lying completely on top of him. Then he started massaging her back. A tiny moan escaped her lips before she caught herself. His thumbs went to the base of her neck, into the fleshy parts of her shoulder blades, then down her spine. It felt heavenly. She didn't know when it happened, but suddenly she was kissing him. Her face lifted and his mouth met hers, his lips soft and sensual. So soft. Slow. He took his time, his mouth lazy and gentle, placing little kisses across her lips, her nose, her chin. Then back to her lips. He was very patient, inviting her to return his soft caresses. His fingers mindlessly rubbed small circles on her back. She squirmed on top of him as a warm ember began to grow into a flame. Gently, with the finesse of an expert, his tongue slid between her lips. He explored the soft cavern of her mouth, sensually teasing her, brushing against the walls of her cheeks. Maddie was overwhelmed. Her jaw went slack. At first she tried to mimic what he was doing. She didn't know how to kiss, but then she couldn't think. Countless minutes passed. Gareth paused only to let her breathe for a second before slipping his tongue inside her again. His kiss grew bold and hot. His hand sank into her hair and he held her hostage, kissing her like he would devour her face. Strange and wonderful sensations moved through her body. She thought she might drown, but she didn't want to take a breath. She didn't want him to stop. She felt like he had no intention of ever stopping, like he had waited a long time for this moment too. It's happening, she thought. This is really happening. She felt a hard bulge against her belly through his sweatpants. He didn't try to hide it. She was lying on top of him, partly cradled between his legs. His bulge dug into her waist. It was a lot larger than she expected. His hand slid up under her shirt to rest on the bare skin of her back. His hand traveled from the band of her sweatpants up the flare of her hips, exploring the dimples in her lower back. Then his rough, warm palm traveled up to her ribs. His hand brushed the scar on her left side, a big spiderweb of raised white skin, where she had landed on a broken bottle. She flinched at the touch. Then her anxiety spiked. Wait! She sat up with a start. Wait, stop. He stopped and gazed up at her in surprise. She sat up on top of him, her legs to either side of his hips, one hand braced against his chest. She winced when she moved her head too fast. Then she grabbed her shirt and tried to pull it down. She pushed his hand away. His lusty eyes, full of simmering heat, widened.
What happened? Did I hurt you?
I don't like being touched. Just stop. She wanted to throw her hands over her face in embarrassment. Fuck me, she thought. I'm such a fucking loser. She finally had him all to herself and she went and fucked it up. He removed his hands from her back and raised them slightly so she could see them. He watched her face.
Sorry, I got carried away.
They stared at one another. She was breathing heavily, her lips were buzzing, her chin wet with his saliva, the taste of him all over her mouth. Her entire body was humming, and she knew he felt it too. The bulge between her legs was rock hard and so thick. Was that really supposed to fit inside of her?
Maybe this was a bad idea. You've been through a lot.
His words crushed her. A bad idea? Like, she was a bad idea. No, it's not a bad idea. I like kissing you. He relaxed a bit. He looked relieved. He reached for her waist again, then stopped.
If you liked it, why did you want to stop?
I don't, she said. He frowned, puzzling through her words. He looked so fucking manly, she thought she would melt. Damn it, I ruined the mood, she thought, forlorn. What if he never touched her again? I suck.
We can stop. You don't have to do this for me.
I don't want to stop. I'm just not used to people touching me.
Okay, I get that. Can I touch you, Maddie?
She nodded. Then he moved to sit up. She grabbed his shirt. Wait, what are you doing? I said it's okay.
You have a concussion. Let's keep it chill.
All right. So then.
Lay down on the couch. I'm going to give you a real massage, help you let go of that tension.
Maddie stiffened. Can I keep my shirt on?
Yeah, if you want.
With a bit of hesitation, she climbed off of him. She'd never had a man give her a massage. Or anyone, really. It was way outside her comfort zone, but not a bad idea. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a bottle of warming lotion. She tried not to make a nervous joke about it. He probably used that lotion to jerk off. Shut up, shut up, shut up, she told her brain. Maddie found herself lying on her stomach on the couch, the warm leather beneath her cheek. His lips brushed against her neck. A satisfying tingle ran down her spine. He settled between her legs. He applied the lotion to his hands, then placed them spanning her lower back, his thumbs feathering the little dimples above her hips. True to her request, he left her shirt untouched. He ran his hands up her spine under the cotton fabric. She gasped.
You like it?
Yeah.
Good.
He kept rubbing his hands over her back until her body felt warm and loose. She thought she would melt into the couch. Why do you always help me? She asked in barely a whisper. His silence lasted so long, she thought he didn't hear her.
Because you're alone.
Maddie felt a lump form in her throat. Yeah, she was alone, even with her stepdad coming and going like a hurricane. Sometimes she felt totally invisible. Gareth's hand traveled up to her shoulders beneath her shirt. His palm left a path of fire across her skin.
Let's say, I'm a wolf.
She closed her eyes, listening to his deep voice, imagining it.
I've been wandering for months with no pack and no territory. I'm running through the forest at night. Suddenly, I smell something different. I come across a girl, all alone. I take her back home, where she's safe. But she keeps running away. It seems that half the time I'm on that mountain, she's out there too. I can't help but wonder why.
His hands traveled over her shoulder blades, warm and steady. She could feel the hard calluses on his fingers. Then his hands roved across her back, slick with massage oil. His fingertips found the scars left by her father's drunk rages. Across her left side was the biggest one, from a broken handle of rum that shattered on the wall next to her head during one of Dean's worst tantrums. She was 15. She took money from his wallet to pay for groceries.
I ain't raising no thief.
He threw a handle of rum at her head. It shattered on the kitchen cabinet. Then she slipped in the rum and fell on the glass. He got pissed at her for falling. A neighbor 2 lots down drove her to the hospital. 30 stitches in the ER with a doctor asking her 100 questions. I fell. I don't know. I just fell. So much blood, it made her sick to look at it. It took the nurses 2 hours to remove all the shards of glass from her skin. Remembering that day almost ruined her mood. She focused on Gareth's palms sliding down her ribcage. His thumb ran over the edges of her scars. He stroked them over and over again, as though memorizing them. Then his hands grew still. He lifted up her shirt, exposing the length of her back. She stiffened in surprise, ready to spring from the couch, but he pinned her down with one hand.
Shit.
Maddie's good mood dissipated. Get off, she said, trying to sit up.
No.
He held her down easily and lifted her shirt higher. She could feel the weight of his body behind her on the couch. She stopped struggling and submitted to his gaze.
Fuck. How did this happen?
He touched the big white web of scar tissue on her left side, just beneath her ribs, where the glass had gouged her. I fell off my bike as a kid, she lied.
Bullshit.
His hand brushed over the bruise on her left hip, where she had slammed into the table just last week. It was almost healed. A pleasant green color.
And this bruise here, who did this?
She opened her mouth. Her jaw worked for a moment. Then a terrible, overwhelming sense of shame filled her. Fuck off, she snapped. It's none of your business. She tried to slide away from him off the couch, but he grabbed her hips. He dragged her back under him. They wrestled for a moment. But she wasn't very strong, and he wouldn't let her slip away. She ended up in the corner of the couch, his arms locked on either side of her, his face hovering over hers. She cast her eyes down, staring at his wide chest, unable to look him in the eye.
All right, let's talk. Since I'm your boyfriend now, I've got some questions. First, how long have you lived like that?
Her lip quivered. Like what?
The house, Maddie.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know it's bad.
You don't gotta apologize, but I want to know how long.
Since my mom died, I was 13. Maddie began to tremble.
Right, sorry that happened to you. That's hard. So your stepdad. I get the mess, but why are you afraid of him?
She clamped shut her mouth. How was she supposed to tell him? She had never told anyone before. She kept her eyes fixed resolutely on his strong chest. His hand brushed a lock of red hair back from her face. He leaned in close.
Why you keep running up mountains at night, little girl? You gonna tell me the truth? Or are you gonna keep lying?
She stared at the ink on his arms, at his long black hair spilling over his shoulders. Anywhere but his eyes. After a long, silent pause, he smirked.
Right, so you want to wait this out. I'll wait.
The minutes stretched, his big body imprisoning her in the corner of the couch, his arms like a cage. His scent made her skin tingle with electricity. Shame and desire warred within her. She wanted to run. He wouldn't let her off the couch. She glanced down at the floor, then over at the kitchen, looking for an escape route. He casually reached down, clasped both her wrists, and pinned her. Finally, she broke. My stepfather hits me, okay? When he gets drunk, sometimes he's completely incoherent, he gets angry, and I'm the only one around. Tears sprang to her eyes, and she let out a choked laugh. He threw a bottle at me, it broke and I slipped on the glass. I had to go to the ER. That's why I have that scar. His shoulders grew rigid. The energy shifted between them. Gareth's face looked dangerous, almost feral. She could almost believe he was a wolf.
I'll fucking kill him.
His voice was so guttural, she could barely understand him. What? No! You can't.
Why do you care? He treats you like shit.
I don't care, I'm over it. Gareth, please listen to me, my life isn't normal. Other kids wonder if their parents love them, but I worry if I'll have running water next week. That's how it is. Hating my dad doesn't change my life. So whatever, I'm over it.
You're not over it.
I am. I'm doing just fine on my own.
No.
His face hovered close to hers.
No. You're hanging on by a thread, but don't worry, I've got you. You don't need that piece of shit anymore. I'll daddy you all you want.
Her mouth opened in shock. He kissed her, his tongue sliding between her lips. His hand went to her jaw, holding her face as he tasted her. When she tried to kiss him back, he groaned and sucked her tongue into his mouth. His teeth bumped against hers. A heady rush of fire moved through her body. Everywhere he touched began to burn, her arms, her neck, her stomach. His head dipped down. He didn't hesitate, his mouth fastened on her nipple through her shirt, hot and wet through the thin cotton. He ran his teeth gently over the hard peak. Then he drew it deep into his mouth, sucking on her flesh. Shivers of pleasure racked her body. Oh my God. He lifted up her shirt and she didn't stop him. He gazed at her naked breasts for a long moment, his eyes devouring her. Then he fell upon them, squeezing the soft flesh with his palms, rubbing her nipples between his fingers. He pushed one breast into his mouth and took a big bite, stuffing his face like a starving man. He growled. Then he bit down on her nipple, making her gasp. He sucked on her tit, flicking it with his tongue so she moaned.
Fuck, you have nice tits. Fuck, Maddie.
He switched to the other breast, leaving a trail of bites and kisses across her chest. Maddie found herself mindless and panting, overcome by his assault. She didn't want him to stop. She didn't want to think. She just wanted to feel him. When he slid down her pants, she lifted her hips and helped him get them off, kicking them to the floor. He caught her legs and pulled her closer to him, so he was leaning between them. She lay with her naked back on the leather couch. Her panties were already soaking wet. When he spoke, his voice was thick with lust.
Pink, that's the girliest shit. I fucking love you.
What?
You heard me.
His fingers found her swollen clit, which he rubbed through her panties just enough to make her gasp.
You like that, huh?
He did it again, trailing his finger over her clit, making her shiver with pleasure. What are you doing? She gasped. She had never felt anything so divine.
What boyfriends do. You ever been touched like this before?
He stroked his thumb over her clit through her panties. She jumped a little. She was so sensitive. She gazed up at him, unable to hide her vulnerable expression. He seemed caught by her look. He leaned down and gave her a deep, wet, devouring kiss.
Spread your legs for me, baby girl.
She made room for him as his head dropped down to take one hard nipple into his mouth. He sucked on it, making her groan. She had never felt pleasure from her breasts before, not this kind of melting weakness. His thumb rubbed little circles over her clit, applying more and more pressure. Maddie ground her hips against his hand, unable to resist. He played with her clit, trying different things, rubbing and tapping and stroking her. He studied her reactions like he was memorizing a map. She felt a wave of tension growing in her body. She sighed and arched against his hand.
There it is.
He pressed against her again. She started, her voice catching in her throat. Deep pleasure flared behind her belly button. What is he doing to me? The pressure kept building. He kept rubbing his thumb in slow, steady circles, his hand braced against her crotch. She threw her arm over her mouth and bit her wrist. He watched her face with the sexiest grin she had ever seen. Gareth, she gasped.
Let go, baby girl.
She cried out when the wave of pleasure crashed over her body. Her legs clenched around his wrist. Her back arched off the couch. She felt herself gush deep inside, her hips convulsing, her whole body squeezing down on him. He continued to rub her, his touch gentle and persistent, pulling her into a second peak. She didn't know how he did it, but she orgasmed a second time, right on top of the first, her heart hammering in her ribs, her muscles contracting powerfully. She cried, almost falling off the couch. He laughed and gathered her up in his arms, pulling her into his lap. Her second orgasm made her limbs like jello. She felt loose and uncoordinated, completely in his power. His lips grazed her forehead, then he kissed the wound on her temple, holding her close.
Was that your first time?
She nodded, unable to speak words. He looked smug as hell. She was naked except for her drenched panties, but she couldn't make herself care. His arms tightened around her, and he kissed her nose.
That's my job. To make you feel good.
She couldn't respond immediately. She felt like melted butter. She just stared into his eyes, all brown and green and gold-flecked. Then, shyly, "So you're serious about the boyfriend thing?"
Fuck yes, I am.
He kissed her again, wet and sloppy across her mouth, getting his saliva all over her lips, totally shameless. She felt completely dominated by his strength, his heat. She tried to turn her face away to breathe, and his mouth trailed down her neck. His hands easily moved her in his lap, placing her legs on either side of him, their crotches rubbing together. She could feel the hard bulge of his erection. He wanted her to feel it. She moaned. Damn. She wanted more. Then his arms went under her ass, bracing her against him as he stood up from the couch. He scooped her into the air like she weighed nothing at all. Her legs wrapped around his waist and she grabbed him hard around the neck. She knew he wouldn't drop her, but she wasn't used to being carried. "Where are we going?" she asked. He walked into his bedroom and lay her down on the bed. Then he pulled off his shirt, revealing his chiseled abdomen. She had never seen a six-pack up close. Her mouth went dry and her lips parted. His body was delicious, toned, hardened, with a wide chest and massive shoulders. Nothing like the boys at school. Every muscle in his abdomen stood out like rock, his skin smooth and tan. His pectoral muscles were like two small mountains across his chest, with a deep indent between them. His shoulders were just as defined. She stared up at him, wondering if he was going to finish what he started. Would she lose her virginity tonight? Her eyes dropped to his crotch where she could see the outline of his hard cock through his sweatpants. The little cuts in his abdomen trailed down past the rim of his pants. His hard-on looked way bigger at this angle. Fuck. He groaned and layered himself over her on the bed, propping her legs up on his shoulders and spreading her wide open, exposed and vulnerable. She felt submissive beneath him, overcome by his natural dominance. The giant wall of his body pressed her into the mattress. His cock nestled against her crotch in the most intimate way, completely sexual. He nestled the hard length of his erection against her dripping cunt. She caught the whimper in her throat. When he finally broke their kiss, she was hot and panting. He hovered over her, their faces an inch apart.
You ever fucked before, little girl?
Maddie shivered, hard. She couldn't reply at first. Well...
Maybe not tonight then. I could hurt you.
His hand gently went to her head, touching her bandage, then her hair. No, I want it. She screamed in her head. Don't stop. She wanted to beg him, but she couldn't get her words in order. He bent down and kissed her again, lazily devouring her mouth. She felt her legs pushed farther back by his shoulders, opening her, trapping her beneath his body. His tongue slid across her bottom lip. Heat. She could feel it down to her toes. Her hips flexed instinctively, and he pressed his hard-on firmly against her, riding her gently.
Maybe I will.
He whispered into her ear. Thoughts of his cock filled her head. What would it feel like to have him fill her empty, aching core? To fully submit to his body, to give herself over to him completely. Yes, she murmured, barely able to speak. His tongue slid in and out of her mouth. She moaned, overcome with desire. He was a lot stronger and heavier than her. He kept grinding against her, and she gasped, her clit sensitive, feeling another wave of pleasure begin to grow. She writhed and groaned. God, was she going to come again? He grinned, watching her face, moving his hips with deliberate slowness. The thought barely passed through her mind before another climax took her body, wringing her out like a towel. She gasped and cried out. He watched her face as her legs gripped him and her spine bowed off the bed. His hand gripped her neck as she cried and moaned, holding her by the throat possessively.
Look at you, coming again like a good girl.
His voice was so deep, she felt it in her belly. She collapsed beneath him, sweating, hardly able to breathe as the wave passed. Her arms and legs were completely useless. She felt like a doll.
You have the sexiest eyes,
he said, his hand still wrapped around her throat. He stroked his thumb over her jaw, then across her bottom lip, then pressed it into her mouth.
You're a puddle now.
She couldn't answer with his thumb filling her mouth. She looked up at him, helpless. 3 times, she had submitted to him, feeling her body weaken and melt into his strength. He enjoyed seeing her melt down. He was dominating her slowly, imprinting himself on her, bringing her into a state of deep arousal, more than she had ever comprehended or imagined. Her mouth opened softly, her lips swollen. I want to have sex with you, she said, perhaps in the most unsexiest way ever.
You do.
His thumb dipped into her pink mouth again, brushing her tongue. Then he withdrew it and spread her saliva across her lips. He was teasing her. He pushed his hips down.
Like this.
She nodded, speechless.
Ah.
His hands went under her ass, cupping her against him. His arms flexed. He moved for real this time, thrusting against her body like he was really fucking her. Maddie gasped at the taste of his power. Her eyes widened. Oh fuck. He was really strong. It scared her, and she clung to his neck in shock. He kept it up for a minute, thrusting against her like he was fucking her, his hips moving so powerful she thought she might break. She clung on tightly to his neck. Fuck, was this what he wanted to do to her? Then he slowed down, pressing her back into the mattress. He kissed her jaw.
Horny girl, this cock is too much for you. Maybe I'll just keep giving you orgasms until you faint.
She shuddered. She knew a threat when she heard one. Please, can we do it? She asked. God, was she whining? I mean, I've come this far.
Maddie.
Hey, that's a big deal for me.
Maddie, you're coming.
He bit her left nipple to prove it and gave her breast a little shake, like a dog with a bone, and she yelped. Stop it.
Okay?
No, I mean, stop teasing me, you're not taking me seriously. Gareth held her pinned against the bed as he considered her.
You ever fucked before?
Maddie blushed. Like, yeah, totally, a lot.
Really?
He watched her face with a discerning look. His eyes narrowed and lost some of their humor. She cringed. I mean, no, not really.
Oh, not really? So you were gonna lie to me again?
I wasn't.
Yeah, you just did.
He pushed his cock against her drenched cunt. His grip tightened on her ankle and he pushed her leg back a little farther. She felt a twinge of fear at how completely he was in control of her body. His voice dropped, growing serious.
That's twice tonight you lied. I don't like it when you lie to me, little girl.
You make it sound like a big deal.
Because it is. If you don't tell me you're a virgin, you're gonna get hurt.
Yeah, whatever.
All right. Have you ever had a finger inside of you?
She blushed at the intimate question. She opened her mouth to answer, but she was too embarrassed. No, actually. She was totally inexperienced. She had played with herself on occasion, and she had tried exploring a few times, but she didn't know the first thing about her own anatomy, except for what she had seen in porn. Gareth groaned.
Fuck. I'm serious, Maddie. I could have hurt you a lot.
My head is fine. I'll be careful.
No, I don't mean that. I'm larger than average. Sex hurts the first time, you know that, right? You can get hurt a lot if you're not ready, or if the guy's a fucking moron.
She shivered at his tone. So then you're not going to sleep with me because I'm a virgin?
I didn't say that.
Then why not?
You're not ready. It's too much for you.
Maddie felt embarrassed. The more the silence stretched, the awkward tension grew, until she didn't know how to dispel it. He released her legs so she could wiggle out from under him, his hand slipping over her body as she moved away. He probably doesn't sleep with virgins, she thought. Or he was having a moment of regret over her age or something. Either way, she didn't buy it. What guy with his level of testosterone wanted to go slow?
You need to sleep. It's late and you have a concussion. I'm gonna take the couch.
He pushed himself off the bed, crossed the floor, ripped a t-shirt down from his closet and threw it at her. Maddie caught the shirt and sat up, feeling a pang of rejection. She gazed up at him with big, confused eyes.
Aw, shit. Don't look at me like that. I'm trying to be the good guy.
She opened her mouth to respond, but he swooped down and kissed her open mouth, sticking his tongue down her throat. Then he broke away with a devilish grin.
Good night, Maddie.
Oh, she started, surprised. Yeah, good night, Gareth. He left the room and shut the door behind him. A little put out, but also exhausted, Maddie slid under his sheets and pressed her face into his pillow. She took a deep, steadying breath, waiting for the pent-up, sexual heat to drain from her body. As the darkness settled around her, she tried not to feel rejected. Fuck, I'm so stupid. She had thrown herself at him, practically begged him to have sex, and he turned her down. A few hot tears slipped down her cheeks. Why did her life have to feel so fucking awkward? It wasn't her fault that she was behind. Most girls got a boyfriend in middle school. She knew one couple who had been together all of high school. It's not like she hadn't tried to date. She had a few crushes. Just no one wanted to date crazy porno titties. Gareth was probably having second thoughts right now. He had seen the trailer and the extent of her fucked up life. Maybe he would dump her in the morning. Why would a guy like him want to be her boyfriend? I have to make myself better somehow, so he'll want to stay with me. Then she fell asleep to his scent on the pillow. Hey, it's Maddie! Thank you for listening to Heart of the Wolf by Mariposa. Waking up in Garrett's house 2 days in a row? Now that's a dream come true. We might even go on our very first date tomorrow. Subscribe to this channel and keep listening for more story, and don't forget, Heart of the Wolf is now available in print and ebook format on Amazon.com.